We're in the fourth year of this war. There's almost no more shock value left to be had on any of these things. And the point being that you should be trying to end the war here. You should not be trying to upend any kind of a peace negotiation, because that's the only thing that can prevent more people dying, military and civilian. My gut tells me that it's not going to change, that Zelensky will not be compelled to do anything. Maybe Trump walks, maybe he doesn't. I'm not sure, but it seems to me that Russia has just made the calculation. We're willing to talk, we're willing to do this, but we expect it to fail, and we're simply going to continue on our plan to just march all the way to the Dnipro River and take whatever we want. I think that that's what's going to end up happening here. And I agree for the people of Ukraine. I agree for the soldiers on both sides of the line that are going to have to follow these orders until the war finally comes to an end, just because none of the handful of people who have actual power will do the right thing by them. That is the truth of it. And it is something that we're doing this show because I want to expose all the things that are going on here and where the fault lies, because we care about the truth here. And we care about all human life, especially innocent civilians who were pointlessly put their lives at risk by, in many cases, their own people, much less the ravages of war that goes along with that. Before we let you go today, though, I want to talk about one other thing. I've mentioned a few times that the Biden administration did a terrible job at reading the room. Their military analysis was just awful. Their decisions, both in the Pentagon and within the White House itself, was atrocious and is as much responsible for all this disaster and carnage as the Europeans are today. There's something that was happened a couple of days ago when there was a conference that former National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan attended, and the issue of the ATACMS missiles came up, the long-range missiles. Now, you may recall that was a point of contention for a long time of the war, that the Zelensky continued to say he wants these long-range weapons from the beginning. The British ended up giving some with Storm Shadow. There was some rumors that the German Taurus missiles were used. It was never completely confirmed whether it was or whether it wasn't. It wasn't out in the open. But then finally, after the election where Biden or Harris actually lost, after that, like about a week or 10 days, they opened the gates and said, okay, now then Ukraine can use them. Now, at the time, we on this channel here, because we're always about telling you the truth, we told you what that would mean. Well, now then, just a couple of days ago, Jake Sullivan did a little soul searching, and in this conversation here, he says, you know what? Probably didn't have the effect that we thought it might.
I would just say, in closing, that we ended up providing Ukraine with a very significant number of these systems, down to the level where, again, we basically have no more to give. And the idea that they made a major difference operationally in the war has not been borne out by the evidence. So I think a lot has been put on this ATACMS decision to suggest, oh, if only you'd given ATACMS, the war would have turned out totally differently. And yet the experience of the use of ATACMS by Ukraine on the battlefield, I think, suggests that that is not, in fact, the case.
So he's kind of doing a mea culpa there, because one of the accusations against the administration among the war hawks was you should have given those things in larger numbers earlier, and it would have made a difference on the battlefield. Ben Hodges was making that argument almost from the beginning. So he was a big advocate of that as well. And now then they're trying to say, well, I know people said that, but the truth is we see now it didn't. So turns out we were right. Well, here's the thing. You were always wrong. On the day it was announced, I went on this show and said this. As I have told you since this issue first came up, really, especially back in September, but even before that, that the use of long-range weapons are not going to change the tactical outcome of this war. That is already decided. Ukraine has lost the war. There is no path even to hang on. And now then you have the National Security Advisor belatedly going, who knew that it wasn't going to work? We knew, anyone who understands military affairs knew that it wasn't going to work. I had mentioned all during the months prior to that, when it was first being talked about, I tried to point out the graphic evidence on the ground that the Russian side had been using long-range weapons since at least the autumn of 2022 in a relentless nonstop firing all across the breadth and width of Ukraine, and having tremendous damage on some of their infrastructure, their economic infrastructure, on their energy infrastructure, their military factories, arms depots, fuel depots, etc., that continually kept hitting that stuff, and it never had the tactical advantage. It never knocked them out of the war. Those were thousands of missiles and long-range drones that caused that damage. And now that people were thinking a few hundred or even a few dozens of these American long range would, or even counting in the Storm Shadows, et cetera, was going to make a difference, it was always painfully evident that it was not going to, because that's just not how it works. People just keep having this fantasy that these things are magic somehow, and if we just had more of them, it would have made a difference. And demonstrably, it didn't, because if it was going to work, then the Russians would have knocked the Ukraine out of the war a long time ago. But it didn't. And Sullivan also fails to mention a couple of other things. He did say earlier in that segment, before he got to that portion that we showed you there, that, well, we didn't give it in the early part because we didn't have enough. And then we started making some more of them. We had a bigger amount of them. And so we finally said, yes, you can have them here. And then he said, we sent several hundreds of them until there was no more left to give. That's what he said. What he's now telling you is, our inventory is now very low. And these ATACMS missiles are trying to go to a new kind anyway. So we didn't have very many of them as it was. And I doubt very seriously that we made several hundred in the amount of time he's talking about there, such that we didn't go below a certain level. I think it's very likely that we went way below a certain level. And now then it's going to take a long time to bring them up. So we're now, if we get into a war, our capacity has been diminished thanks to the Biden administration. The second thing he didn't tell anything about is, because we let several hundred of these things go, we gave an absolute golden opportunity to an adversary that we may one day end up fighting, the Russians, to figure out how our missiles work, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, how to defeat them. They tried many different things with electronic warfare. They shot them down with their anti-air capabilities, their interceptor missiles, etc. So they figured out what the ranges were, how you can deceive them, where you need to put things to keep them out of the way, et cetera, but most importantly, how to knock them down. Golden opportunity. In the event that we fight against almost anybody that Russia would know, because if we get into a fight with somebody else, i.e. China, I promise you all of this data will have been given to them before. And so our future adversary is already going to be equipped, whether it's the HIMARS system or the ATACMS, because they both use basically the same guidance system. And there's a reason why you haven't heard anything about the HIMARS after the original time it came out. Only a handful of strikes here and there in the years since, because they figured out how to deceive most of those, or electronic warfare, divert them so that they just landed in an empty field or something like that. So our capacity is lower because we don't have as many of these rounds, and their effectiveness of what's left is now diminished in the case that we need to use them. All of those things are probably going to come back to haunt us someday, and I just seem to go right over the head of Jake Sullivan. And I consider that one of the more egregious things, and that's just one. I mean, you can also add the same thing to our 777s, to our self-propelled M109 howitzers, to the Bradleys, to the Strykers, to the Abrams tanks, all those things. I mean, they physically have them now. They have trophies in Moscow at several museums and places. They have paraded them around. I have a great deal of confidence you're going to see a lot of them paraded on the 9th of May on their Victory Day. To our humiliation and shame, but it's not just the humiliation and shame; it's also the ability they have to mine those things for data to figure out ways to minimize their effectiveness in future conflict. These things are going to really cost us, and the longer we keep going on with this, the worse it's going to get. So there is, like I say, the future historians are going to have a field day with a lot of the senior leaders of our country and in Europe, et cetera. And I grieve about what may happen in the future to our own army should we get into a war that we shouldn't ever even be in. But if we are fighting in one, now then, because of the past sins, our army is going to be less effective than it would be anyway. And it's going to be a tough fight if we go up against a peer, which we haven't done since Vietnam and maybe even Korea. So it's important to understand this. I want to get this on the table right now so people understand just how bad this war is, and another reason why the Trump administration should get this damn thing off the table right now. Let's finish this quickly and stop the bleeding of our own capabilities, and of course stop the bleeding for the Ukrainian soldiers and all the soldiers that are involved in this. That's what we need to do. Thank you very much. Appreciate you watching this show this afternoon. We will look forward to seeing you tomorrow on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.